Alright, so I'm getting ready to build a neopixel blade. I'm going to bring you all along for the ride. So number one, got my LED strips, and the ones that I'm going to use on this blade are actually 3535s. There you can see them, 3535s. I have my Prism 5.1 test board. I'm getting ready to switch this to a Prism 5.5 test board because I just got 3 reflashed to 5.5. That way you can have blade effects and all that. I got my test battery. I got white electrical tape, which I'll explain what I use that for later. I got my packet of SMD resistors, and I use the SMD resistor in the footprint here on the blade adapter. That's where I put my SMD resistors. I have my custom Sabers shop parabolic tip that's hollow, and I may hollow that out a bit more. This is the first one I've ever used, and yeah. Yeah. Yep. I'll be hollowing out that tip more. It's not hollowed out enough. Of course, I have the butt end, which is what your blade target goes in, like that, and then that fits into the back of the blade. Have my pipe cutter, because I'm going to be cutting the blade to size. So I use my pipe cutter to do that. Now, Dimitri stock is going to massively disagree with this, but I've used it on all my neopixel builds. Dimitri says that the heat shrink that I use, and I used 1/2 inch shrink tubing, there you can see. The heat shrink that I use on my back-to-back neopixel strips, I use it as an additional diffusion method, but it also holds the strips more solid, holds the strips together. Dimitri's stock disagrees with it, saying that the heat shrink holds too much heat in the strips. Just wrap them with cellophane. Well, I am going to wrap them with cellophane, which I do have cellophane here, but both cellophane and heat shrink are both going to be airtight. You know, there's some ventilation on either end, whether you wrap them in cellophane or heat shrink, in my opinion. You know, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I'm using, in this case, a transwhite blade. This is 7/8. Now I wanted to show the difference in some types of foam. So this is a scrap of Master Replicas foam, which, you know, I really like Master Replicas foam. This is TCS's first iteration of their foam, and this is TCS's second iteration of foam, which was more like Master Replicas foam. You can also get this, you know, this second generation foam from the Saber Armory, or KR Sabers. The second generation of foam is dense. It's easy to tell if you've got Master Replicas or Hasbro foam, because it has that slot in it. I hope y'all can see that. And this is TCSS foam. The difference between that and the Custom Saber Shop's first generation foam, you can see how, you know, really light this is. It was full of air bubbles, and it just really, their first generation foam wasn't really good at diffusing neopixels, but their second generation foam is. I'm a huge fan of KR Sabers and the Custom Saber Shop second generation foam for neopixel diffusion. And then lastly, I have cellophane gift wrap. So it's just, you know, clear gift wrap. You can get it at a floral shop, any hobby shop. So let's begin. So the first step that I make in my blade building process is I go ahead and cut my blade to length. I'm going to use the pipe cutter. I've got my marker on here. Most of my blades are around 34.5 inches that I make for myself. You know, usually you have a blade depth that takes away some of your blade, and I use a pipe cutter. Now, some people don't like using a pipe cutter because they say you know, they can't fit their blade in, but I'm going to show you the trick I use for that. So when you're cutting 1-inch blades, you can actually pop a piece of PVC inside of there. I forget who posted that. I think it was JB Kuma. And the reason that I cut them first is because that way when you cut them first, then you can cut your strips to length. And I always cut my strips, you know, a couple inches too long, and then, you know, I'll cut off some of the strips. But this is the first thing I do so I can cut my strips to length, because I buy mine in 2-meter pieces, and you know, then I cut them to length. And then I solder on my test leads, and then I test each strip to make sure that each strip is doing what it's supposed to do with the prism. And there it goes. Bada bang. Done. So that's, you know, the initial, this was my 40-inch blade stock, and I cut it to, you know, 34.5. So once I've cut the blade, this is the end that I've cut. I take a hobby knife and just trim the inside of the blade where the you know, where the pipe cutter creates a bit of a dent. Well, you know, a lot of people don't like using pipe cutters because it creates that dent. But the cool thing is now you have a tight fit of your blade end cap. So there is that end of the blade, and basically there's the rough draft of my blade. So now I know how long I need to cut my strips. So in my package from BTF Lighting was 4 meters of the 35-35 strips, which is the skinny strips. And the cool part about my test rig is I already have the adapter ready to plug in. So my first strip, I'm going to cut it to length. So I'm throwing it down here, and I actually cut them long, as I said. I cut them, you know, about as long as my tip, and I know that I'm going to be cutting more off of them, but just to be safe, you know, I cut them long. So there's my first strip, and I'm going to set it to the side. And then my second strip, which I'm going to start where I cut, because I buy mine in 2-meter lengths, but you know, if you buy 1 meter, then you're solid. So I'm going to go ahead and cut there. Actually, I want to come down here to the end, and I'm going to cut so I've got pads to solder to here. And I'm going to go ahead and cut there. Now when I'm cutting these, I'm also looking at the arrows, so of course my arrows are, you know, facing that way. Now, really quick on these strips, and I buy mine in 2-meter segments, and I'm looking here, and you know, we do have some joints, and this portion of this strip actually has 2 joints in it. It has a joint here, and it also has a joint here. Let's check the other strip. There's a joint there. So there's just 1 joint in that strip. So what I'm going to do with these joints is I'll look at them, and this 1 joint looks a little wide. I might tighten that up, so I might resolder that. This joint actually looks pretty good, but this one down here is a little wide. I might resolder that. You know, on these 35-35 strips, the LEDs are already pretty far apart, but you can see this LED is more far apart than that LED, and sometimes that could cause a weird shadow right there. So I want to try to tighten this up and probably bring these two a little bit closer together if I can. And then what I'll do is I'll pre-tin the pads and put a wiring harness on this strip so I can plug them into my prism. But actually right now I can already go ahead and test this strip. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug this strip into my prism. Ugh. Struggling here today. Make sure whites, reds, greens are all on the same side. They are. So we're solid. So my test board is good to go. I'm going to attach my redneck power supply to my power wires on the prism. And you hear the prism boot up, and now we're going to test this strip. So here's the joint in the strips that I've separated with my soldering iron, and I've cut a little bit off of them, and I'm going to try and rejoin them here one joint at a time. Sometimes the strips want to move, so I'm going to put something heavy on them. I don't want them moving. I'm going to, add some more solder here as well. But basically, it's grabbing one pad off of one joint and another pad off another one. So the bottom pad to the top pad basically is what's happening here. And I'm going to add a little bit more solder there on these joints. And then clean that up. Okay, now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take one of these plugs that I'll be using for testing, and I'm going to, this is one of the plugs I took off of another set of strips, and they use 28 gauge wire on these plugs, so I'm going to strip off. And by the way, I never reuse this wire because this wire is just absolute crap wire. And then I'll tin these, and then I'll add this plug onto the strip so I can test it on my test board, and my test board already has these plugs on it, so that's what I do to test the strips. Tinning these wires. Good to go there. Now we've tinned those wires. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to tin each of these pads to receive those wires. So you go in here and heat those pads up with my iron. Tinning the data now, and the negative side. The positive side is always the side with the diode. The negative side is the side without the diode on these strips. Now look, this is not permanent soldering of these strips. This is just tacking these wires so that I can test the strips to make sure that the strips are working, especially after I've redone the patch to get the patch closer together. And there, now I have my my patch plug temporarily in place, and what I'm going to do is clean those contacts with a little bit of alcohol to make sure there's no flux. And I'm going to clean that joint that I repaired, and I'll clean up that joint a little bit, and I'm going to go test it here and see how we're doing. Alright, so this is my test strip that I've just done the repairs on, and now I'm going to test to make sure that this strip works. And you can see I've got a bad pixel there, and my joint didn't work. And that pixel might just be bad because that joint's no good. So you can see how and I kind of did this on purpose because I wanted you guys to see what that looks like. So that's an improper repair. So back to the soldering bench we go. Alright, so I've taken that splice out of the equation for right now because I want to test this strip. And what I may do is just put that splice on the top end, and let's see what we got. So now the strip's not lighting up at all, and what that tells me is this pixel where their joint was bad. So this is why I cut my strips a little bit long, you know, even though I had to mess around with that. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to cut out this pixel because this strip's not lighting up. And that was the problem. The joint was fine. This pixel is bad. So what I'm going to do now is disconnect my strips. And I'm going to cut off just this pixel, but I'm going to leave my data pads. And now I'm going to rejoin my wire onto this pixel here and see if we don't get illumination. This is the pain in the butt part of the strips. This strip prep takes a while, but once you get both the strips working, it's relatively easy from here. Okay, so this is the strip that I cut the pixel off of, and really need some helping hands in here because this is a pain in the butt. I am going to solder my plug onto these strips, my test plug. And then the positive wire goes on the diode side. These skinny strips are hard to work with because they're so small. Now it's just not wanting to cooperate. There we go. And now the last wire, my negative wire. There you see. So now my plug is on. Let's go test these again. Alright, so this is the strip that I've been having issues with, that I'm having to work on. Alright, so the strip was fine. We just had a bad pixel, and that bad pixel was right at that joint, so good thing we cut it out. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the remainder of the strip, because now this strip is shorter than my other strip. So this is my other strip, and the reason that this strip is shorter is because, you know, I cut out that, remember we had that section here in the very beginning. Well, I've cut it out, and now I'm going to put that section here on the end of this strip rather than at the beginning. So that's what I'm going to do now, and then hopefully that'll be the final test, and then we can put these strips back to back. Alright, I have patched on a piece of strip onto the end of this shorter strip, and now we're getting ready to test it. Oh yeah! So we're in business. Now both my strips have passed the test. So now what I'm getting ready to do is to desolder my test plug from this one. So I'll cut this off and desolder this test plug. And then I'm going to desolder this test plug. Then I'm going to join these strips back to back. But before I do that, I had some white electrical tape. Anywhere that you have a joint, like here, you need to cover that with electrical tape on the back. Because remember, when these strips are back to back, the positive on this strip is on the negative on this strip. And where you've soldered or you have joints, there's a potential for you to get reverse polarity where the strips make contact. Because remember, when they're back to back, you have reverse polarity, positive, negative. So you need to put a piece of insulator between the two strips, and I use white electrical tape cut to the width of the strips. And everywhere where I either have a joint like here, I'll put some white electrical tape on the back. And when you all remember, you're also going to have a joint at the base of your strips, and you're also going to have a joint at the top of your strips, and you need to make sure that that joint is covered with white electrical tape. I'm also going to check my strips and make sure that I don't have any joints that match each other, and if I do, then typically I stagger them. But what I'm going to do is go do the white electrical tape on the strips, and I'll try to show you somewhere where I did that. And once I get the white electrical tape under the joints and at the base and at the tip, then I'm going to put the strips back to back. That's the next step. So this is the factory plug, and basically what I do is I just use snips to cut the shrink wrap off so I can get to the pads. And I don't want the tape to come off with the shrink, so I'm going to cut that. Here's the shrink, and then I'm going to desolder these wires. Now I'll keep these plugs for testing purposes. I can test other strips with these, so I keep the plugs. I don't know how many plugs do you need. So there we go, plugs off the strips on that one, and that one's going to be ready for tape here in a second. And now I want to desolder the plug that I put on the strip that I had all that work to do. And it really wasn't that much work to get the strip going. You just have to learn how to diagnose these things, and basically it's pretty simple. Once you get a working strip, you've got a working strip. So now I have these strips working. Now what I want to do is I'm going to be cutting electrical tape to put on these joints. So here I have a joint in this strip which is about mid strip, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come and cut out some of this backing tape that's over this joint. And I'll test these strips again once I finish doing this. But remember, the reason that I'm doing this is to avoid issues with reverse polarity here at this joint. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my white electrical tape and I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut a small sliver of white electrical tape, and I didn't get that peeled back far enough, so let me peel that back a little bit further, and actually I can shorten that. But here's my sliver of white electrical tape, and I'm going to put that over my contacts so that I don't get reverse polarity where the strips touch. And then I will take a hobby knife and trim any of that excess electrical tape. But let's get all the joints taped. So I know I have a joint there. Oop, there's another one there. So there's actually, you know, 2 joints in this one. And you can see there where the tape is separated. So remember, this gets repeated under every joint, at the base of each strip and at the tip of each strip, because that's where you could have the danger of reverse polarity. You don't want these pads touching one another. Now you could tape the whole strip. That's not going to hurt anything, except you're going to add some, you know, depth. And of course my piece of electrical tape dropped. I mean, you're going to add thickness, and remember, thickness is something we're trying to avoid, because the thicker your tied pair is, your strips, the harder it is to get more diffusion around them. So the less crap we have around our... One thing I wanted to show here is that on these strips, you know, this is the base of the strip that I'm working on now, and I'm going to take the backing and the tape off of this strip, and you can usually get that on the one that you have to heat up to remove the plug from, because what happens is that the backing tape, when you put the strips back to back, doesn't really like to fit really well on the other backing tape. So you have to make sure you get the adhesive off of one of the back of one of the strips. So I'll leave the adhesive on the other strip, but I'm taking the adhesive off of this strip. And here at this joint, it just wants to be difficult, but I'll get it. You're coming off adhesive. There we go. Oh, all right. My bench is a mess right now, but you know, we're just trying to make a video here about prepping your strips for making a blade, and this is all part of it. So this is a piece of electrical tape I'm going to put on that joint right there. Bada bang. And then we're going to trim that so it's See my shaky hands. I'm old. I've drank a lot of caffeine this morning. So we've got the adhesive off, and we're patching up all the joints right now, and there's that one. And I didn't think there was another one on that strip, and there's not. So now we just need electrical tape at the base and tip of this strip. So I'm going to zap on a piece of tape on the base of the strip. Where our 2 strips will be joining, because we don't want reverse polarity down there where we're going to be soldering. And then we need to put one at the tip. Okay, so here we have both of my strips, and this is the strip with the adhesive on it. This is the strip I removed the adhesive from. I got my arrows on the strips, both going towards my right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the adhesive backing on this strip and try to get it. And remember, it's hodgepodge here, so there is our adhesive backing off the strips. Now, the base of the strips is here. Now, what I want to do is to stagger my pixel. I'm trying to get it in frame where you can see that I've got my pixels staggered. but I also want to make sure that our pads are going to work. So I'm going to cut off this piece of electrical tape that I put on there so I can make sure our pads are lining up, and they are, and my pixels are staggered. And then I'm going to begin joining my strips back to back with them lying against the table. That keeps them aligned side to side. And they're still staggered. The reason I do the staggering is because I think staggering helps to avoid some of the shadowing. Because, you know, if you have a shadow here, then the light from this pixel actually makes it around to the other side. It's very bright. It all reflects. So there are my back-to-back strips put together. And now the next thing I'm going to do before I do my shrink wrap is I'm going to actually solder my wires onto the base of the strip, and I'll show you how I do that. Basically, I use a method similar to Cal's on KR Sabers video, in that I run a single wire across both data pads, and then you'll see what I do with the positives and negatives, and then I'll run those to my wiring harness so we can check how things are operating. And I'm going to bring in my solder and my soldering iron. I know my soldering iron looks dirty in this image, but it's not. It is shiny, and I'm going to retin these pads with some new solder. Okay, so here we are again, and I've cleaned the adhesive off, and now we're going to make sure that those pads are tin good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of 22 gauge red wire. I'm going to strip a little bit of it off and tin it. I'm doing this off camera. I'm just doing a very, very little bit. And this is how I begin joining my strips. This is the base of the strip that's going to be connected to the neopixel connector. So you're going to see me come in with the red wire here. And then I'll also film this on the GoPro so you can kind of get a larger overview, because I know that on the scope here it's small. So there is my red wire on that positive. Then I'm going to take my red wire around, and you can see basically what's going to happen is I'm going to cut it there and strip it, and I'm going to join it to the opposite pad on the opposite strip, because remember, they're back to back, so polarity is reversed. So I'm going to strip just a hair of that wire, just a little bit, and tin it. And some of this is probably going to be off scope or out of focus because I'm not going to screw around with it. Okay, so now that one's stripped. Now I'm going to take a piece of black 22 gauge wire. Let me get this back into focus there so you guys can see. I know it looks a little bit messy, but I'm going to clean it up. Plus it's under scope, so it looks, you know, really nasty, but it's not. I'll be cleaning all this up with alcohol. Remember, that's like 250 times magnification or something like that. So now I'm going to bring in this black wire, and hopefully we're in frame over there because I'm not looking. And I'm going to put my black wire on there. Bada bing. Now our black wire, our negative wire is on. So now I'm going to take our positive wire and try to find the best way to loop it on here. I think I'm going to go on the outside of this. And then this is the hard one because, and let me try and get this on frame. So I've taken my red wire and it's going to the strip on the opposite side that I've already tinned. Bam. And then I'm going to take my black wire and curl it around. And I think I'm going to run my black wire through the loop on my red wire, which I'll show you guys this here in a second. I'm going to run it 1 pixel shorter. And then I'm going to connect it in. Get this back on frame. I'm going to connect it in to my opposite there. So you can kind of see what I'm doing there. I'll show it to you all in a second once I finish. So now I'm going to cut that wire, strip a little bit of that and tin it. I'm using 22 gauge wire here. This is 22 gauge PFE. That's what I'm joining my strips with. That's also, you know, what I'll be running from the hilt connector into the board, but I'm also using 22 gauge PTFE to join the strips here. Let me tin that wire. Bada bang, and I'm going to trim it a little bit after I tinned it. There we go. And this is the bitch one. And sometimes I have to take my forceps, and the camera is really, really in the way here. But I'm going to bring in my forceps so I can really put the habeas twistus on the thing. And of course the camera arm is right where I need to be. I don't know if you can hear the camera arm interfering with what I'm trying to do here. And I'm going to pop that one on. Bada bing. So there is, and then I'm going to release my forceps. And I'll kind of show you what's going on here. So basically, this is the base of my strips. And let me get something small I can point with. So this is the positive on my other side strip. And it's connected here to the positive on my front-facing strip. And then the negative on my front-facing strip, which is right here, is connected to the negative on my back-facing strip here. Now what I'm fixing to do is run a data wire across both of these pads, which I'm going to use 26 gauge there, and then I'm going to clean all this up. And then on the reverse side, I'm going to actually run my positive and negative leads off my back-facing strip. Now the problem is you got to be quick or you'll release the solder that you put on the other side. But this is how I join my strips. So now I'm going to bring in my 26 gauge data line, which I'm going to strip this one longer so it can reach both data pads. Let me try to get all that back into frame. So I'm going to try to strip this longer so I can reach both data pads, and I will be back at you. So now I've trimmed my data wire, and well, I've tinned it so you can see that's my data wire is going to go across both pads. Of course, it is a little bit long, so I do need to trim it. So I'm going to trim a little bit off my data wire, and let's see how we're looking there. And then bam, we're across both pads. So now this is going to be the bitch because the scope is really in the way of my work. So what I may try to do is come in here. Man, I'm doing this with my offhand, and this really is tough doing this on the scope. But what I want to do is it just really doesn't want to cooperate here. And then, I got it tacked, and now what I want to do is come in here and bloop it on that one, hopefully without moving it. Alright, so let's see what we're looking like here. So there you can see my data line, and I'm looking there to see how we're looking. Let's take some alcohol and clean that off. So we're going to take some alcohol and clean all that off. And I'll check to make sure I don't have any little microscopic shorts there on this side, and then we'll zap the power wires on and everything on the other side. That's how I joined the base of my neopixel strips. So you can see those loops there. This is at the base. Normally all this is going to be in the blade socket, so you're never even going to see any of that, but you still got neopixels illuminating. This is my permanent data wire here that's going to my blade adapter. Now I have to attach my positive and negative leads, so for that I'm going to flip my neopixel strip. I'm going to try to get it back in view there, and now I need to strip a 22 gauge leader, which I'm doing off camera here, and then I'm going to tin it. And then I'm going to trim it to be just what I need. Then I'm going to come here, and I got to be quick, because if I'm not quick, I will mess up my solder on the other side of the strip. Bam. And now I need my negative leader. Again, 22 gauge. Going to strip a little bit off of this one. This is basically the same as Cal Jerome's technique that he had on his neopixel blade building video quite a while ago last year. And I kind of do what Cal does, but slightly modified. Oops, I want to trim that a little bit. It's a little long. And I know these look enormous under scope, but these are actually very, very, very short. Welcome to Beaker's world. This is so hard reaching around this scope. This is not, having the scope here is just tough. And there is my negative lead soldered on, and that's a good solid joint. So these are my leaders now, and my orange data on the other side, and those are pretty solid. So now I'm going to attach these wires to a plug, which that's very simple, and I'll rejoin you with the GoPro while we're testing the blade to make sure both sides are working. Alright, I've just finished shooting this under scope so you guys can kind of see what I did there. Now I'm going to do a final test to make sure I don't have any continuity between my positive and negatives. In between negative and data. Between negative and data. Good on that side. Let's check the other side. And make sure we've got good continuity on data here. Make sure we don't have continuity there or there. And we're good. Good there. Good there. Good there. Good there. Good there. Bada bing. Now we're ready to go test. Alright, so this is my back-to-back neopixel strip, and basically this is going to be my test of how we're functioning. So I'm going to hook up my and both sides are working. Both sides are working, both sides are the same color. Retraction. Alright, so now the next step is I'm going to heat shrink my back-to-back strips, and once I heat shrink them, we'll be getting closer to finalizing everything. Alright, so the next phase of this video is this is my blade side adapter, and I am fixing to pre-tin all my spaces, including I'm going to pre-tin the space for my SMD resistor here. I'm applying heat to the pad. Bada bing, add some solder. I'm going to pre-tin all my wire pads as well. And I don't know which side I'm going to use yet. Usually it just depends. So there is all of those pads pre-tinned. I'm going to clean up. It's hard to tell because I know that the wet flux is making it look different than it is. So we're going to clean off that with alcohol, and maybe once all of that flux goes away, you'll get a better idea of what the tinning looks like. And there you go. So now what we're getting ready to do is we're going to bring in my SMD resistor on these two pads here. And I'm going to use my SMD resistor to bridge those two pads. That becomes the data resistor for the blade. Okay, so what we're looking at here is this is a 330 ohm SMD resistor. Let's see if I can show you what it looks like here. Bam. It's just a little bitty thing. There is that little resistor, and here is where we are going with that little resistor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this resistor with my tweezers and I'm going to, I shouldn't do this through the scope, I need to be doing this by looking here. And I'm going to blam on my resistor, just like that. And then I'm going to loop the other side. Let's try to focus in on that a little bit. I don't know if you can see that or not. It's all pixelated. Try to take the scope off of there and zero in on it. And let's see what it looks like. There's my resistor soldered across the pad, and it looks like it's a little bit, too far over. There's my resistor. Now I'm going to test it. I'll go to my other video to test it. Alright, so I've just soldered on the SMD resistor onto my main 331 ohms. At my data pad we got 331 ohms, and at that data pad we have 331 ohms. So I'm solid. We're delivering 331 ohms through that resistor, so I'm happy with that. Let's measure across the resistor, 330 ohms, and then let's measure there and there. Oops. Yep, solid. So that is golden. So now we're ready to take this off my scope, and there you can see my scope that I've been using to shoot all this stuff, and we're ready to solder on the lead wires to our blade, and we're through with these little bitty SMD resistors. Okay, I've cut my leads for my neopixels, and that's a disaster there. That's okay. And now what I'm going to do is strip, just a little bit of my leads so I can solder to my neopixel adapter. And now I will not be able to use my prism to test anymore. Now all testing will be in a lightsaber. And my data is 26. So now those are all stripped, and I'm going to dip, 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 dip. And now I'm going to tin those. Tin those with some flux. Beautiful flux. Now I'm going to my pre-tin pads on my blade adapter. Bada bam. Data. Bada bam. Negative. Bada bam. So now all of my everything is connected, and now what I want to do is make sure that I get rid of all the flux around all of those pads. So I'm going to clean them with alcohol, and that is basically my blade adapter, and make sure all the flux is off on the other side. And that's my blade adapter. We're solid there. Good to go. Here's my 1/2 inch shrink wrap, and it's clear shrink, and I'm going to cut it to length. And then I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to feed my strips into it. And there we go. So the strips are in the heat shrink, and I want to make sure I flatten them back out before next step, which is going to be heating the shrink. Very exciting stuff here. We're going to put Kylo Ren in the background, but we're going to start shrinking, heating our shrink. And you know, this is a fairly long process, but just trying to get the shrink really good and solid around my strips. This is my first layer of diffusion. And we go to the other side. And you want to make sure it all lays down nice and even. Dimitri's stock is furious right now. So that's enough of that. You get the point. So there is the heat shrunk strips. They're both together now. I actually put them on a flat surface to let them cool, to make sure that heat shrink, you know, is very flat, and I keep flattening them as they're cooling. And the next step is I'm going to sand my clear heat shrink with 400 grit sandpaper on both sides over the pixels. Okay, so I've heat shrunk my pixels, and I've told y'all how I've done that. I actually hooked them back up to my test strip here because I want to make sure after I heat shrunk them that everything's still fine. There's that side, there's that side. Lock up on both sides, blaster blocks. But basically you're going to take this sandpaper, 400 grit, and we're going to go over the shrink wrap just like this to rough it up. And basically, in effect, this sanding becomes your first layer of diffusion. Sand in the shrink wrap. It's not very exciting. So for the next step, which is going to be cellophane, the workspace has to absolutely be clean. So my workspace is clean. You don't want any dust or anything that can get into the cellophane that becomes, you know, a piece of lint inside the lightsaber blade. It's really critical for the cellophane on the outside of the foam, but you know, this first bit of cellophane is going to be inside the foam, so not quite as critical. I don't know if this is going to show up on video or not, but I've now cut a piece of cellophane to the length of my strip, about 2 feet long, and now I'm going to, it's always hard to get the cellophane roll started. Alright, so I got it started. The end's not wanting to cooperate there, but you want to try and keep this tight around the strips, because this cellophane is actually going inside the foam. This is our second layer of diffusion. Remember, our first layer of diffusion is the actual clear shrink wrap itself. So this cellophane is going over the clear sanded heat shrink that we did. And this layer of cellophane becomes our second layer of diffusion. And I'm already running off down there. And it's okay if there's some flexes in this cellophane. But the important thing is to keep the roll tight. And the roll's wanting to run all amok there. So this is the bitch. I mean, everybody's like, $200 for a blade. Yeah. Yeah. Because we spend, you know, hours trying to get this right. Yeah. $200 for a blade. It's a lot of work. You know, it's a lot of work to get this to work out right and to look right and to be diffused. It's not like buying some strips and popping them in a piece of plastic. There's a lot of work to this. It is an art form for sure to make these blades work right. And it's taken a lot of research to even get here. I don't like the way that's heading, so I'm going to fix it, because that cut may not have been even, because our roll is even. And you can see that the neopixels, you know, you can't even really see the individual pixels anymore. And they're disappearing. So now what I'm going to do, I'll cut that cellophane right there so it's ending on a nice straight line, and then I'm going to take my foam and test fit those into my foam with the cellophane wrapped around them. And this is the bitch. This is where you gotta inchworm this stuff. And the fact that I'm already struggling there, that's too tight, so I'm gonna cut some of this cellophane off, because it's actually too tight. So I'm going to cut, you know, probably about that much cellophane off, because it's too tight going into the foam. You know, if you're starting to have to inchworm it right off the bat. That's bad. You know, you get it in about a foot and then you have to inchworm it. You know, that's not quite as bad. So I'm gonna put the, yeah, that's fitting a little bit better. All right, so I got it in about that far, and now we're gonna have to start inchworming it. So by inchworming it, what you do is you pinch the foam and boom, there's the strips, and then I pull the foam and then let it go on. Pinch the strip, pull the foam, pinch the strip, pull the foam, and it goes in. This way you're not pushing the strip into the foam. Pull the foam and it follows. So I want to pinch the strip, pull the foam. We're making progress. Inchworming the foam onto the strips, etc. You get the point. Okay, so my blade is now in the foam, and I'm going to wrap it in some more cellophane. I can usually fit about this much cellophane in, and this is where it's critical to not get spots on your blade, and I saw a spot there. So it's important to keep this cellophane tight and smooth, because this roll will be nearest the edge of the blade. And here's where we're hoping to get our last layer of diffusion. And I'm trying to keep that nice and smooth there. And once we have that nice and smooth, I want to go into my blade with it. And we don't want it crinkled, so I'm trying to make sure oh, it seems like just a bit too much. So it's starting to get too tight near the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unroll about that much, and I'm going to cut it. Just not going to be able to get enough diffusion in, so bam, that's gone. And then let's re-roll it and make it tight. We're going to make it as tight as we can. So you can see there, it's only going to be about a foot that we're going to be able to fit on. But it's important that we keep it tight and wrinkle free. And now let's give that a whirl. You can see that appears to be sliding in there relatively easier. And the further you go in, the tighter it wants to get, but we're so close to the end here. The danger is in pushing stuff in and forcing it, is then you're gonna kink the the strips, and then that will cause corn cobbing if you kink the strips. I think it's going to go. And oh yeah, there it goes. So now we have our, I'm going to go ahead and pop that on, and then I'm going to give the strips a tug, and now we're going to test this blade. Alright, so now I've got the blade in a test saber, and off we go. Fire blade, lock up, and you can see I still haven't put the tip on down here. This is just looking at the neopixels, seeing how they look. Some of these are crazy blade styles. Alright, so my last step is, this is one of the Custom Saber Shop's parabolic tips, and I'm trying to give myself a little bit more space in here, so I'm going to hollow this out a little bit more. It makes a mess. I don't know if any of that got on video because my battery died, but I took my Dremel and I hollowed out the tip a little bit more, not to allow more light in, but to be able to fit more of my neopixels and diffusion in there. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut back my diffusion at least that much, and then I'm also going to have to cut the strips. So right now I'm cutting the foam and my cellophane, and there we can get to, obviously I'm going to end up having to cut those strips quite a bit. Looks like I'm going to be cutting 3 neopixels off that one and 5 off this other one. So I'll come back once I get all that cut back. Okay, I've performed surgery and I've cut off the pixels that weren't needed, and now I've left that little bit of neopixels there, and I'm going to put the tip on temporarily. Eventually I'll glue these on, and that's a tight fit because remember that's the end that I cut, and we're going to insert this into our test saber. And bingo. There's the tip, fully illuminated. No pixelation going in the tip. That's very nice. I like it. I like that very much. So, thus ends blade building. We built a transwhite neopixel blade. That's how I do it. On clear blades, the big difference is I use the strip diffuser inside. And you can't fit as much diffusion in when you use the strip diffuser inside of either a 7/8 or a 1-inch blade, but the strip diffuser diffuses better. So 6 of one, half dozen the other. I like transwhite. I like clear blades. I can make them both. This blade came out great. Thank you guys for coming along for the ride, and may the force be with you, or the dark side as it were.